The massive crystalline towers of Nexus Prime stretched toward the artificial suns that bathed the galactic capital in perpetual light. Inside the Grand Council chamber, representatives from 12 of the most powerful species in the galaxy gathered around a circular table that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The air hummed with tension as holographic displays flickered to life, showing star maps dotted with concerning red markers. Ambassador Vethran of the Etherians leaned forward, his crystalline body catching the light as he studied the data. His people had ruled their sector for over 3,000 years, and never had he seen such rapid territorial expansion from a newcomer species. The red markers represented human colonies, and they were spreading faster than anything the Council had ever encountered. "Look at this," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality typical of his race. "In just 50 Earth years, these humans have established settlements in 3 different star systems. They ignore our established borders and act as if they own whatever space they can reach." General Mordak of the Vorthan Empire slammed his scaled fist on the table, causing several smaller council members to flinch. The Vorthans were known throughout the galaxy for their military might, and Mordak embodied everything intimidating about his species. His yellow eyes blazed with anger as he gestured at the holographic displays. "These humans are worse than simple border violators," he growled. "They establish colonies without asking permission from anyone. They defend primitive species from our taxation collectors. Most dangerous of all, they make other species think they can resist our authority too." The other council members nodded in agreement. For centuries, the galactic order had been clear and simple. The 12 dominant species controlled territory, resources, and trade routes. Smaller species either joined willingly or were forced to comply. It was a system that had brought stability and prosperity to those in power. But humanity was different. They had appeared seemingly from nowhere, their small blue planet producing explorers and colonists who spread across the stars with disturbing independence. Unlike other species who sought council approval before expanding, humans simply went where they wanted and built what they needed. High Arbiter Nexum of the bureaucratic syndics pulled up detailed reports on his personal display. His species valued order and paperwork above all else, and the human disregard for proper procedures offended him deeply. "The violations are extensive," he announced in his dry, methodical voice. "They have established 17 major colonies without filing a single expansion request. They refuse to pay the standard resource extraction fees. They have entered into trade agreements with 43 minor species without council oversight." What worried the council most was not just human independence, but its effect on others. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy about species questioning long-established agreements. Some were asking why they needed council permission to expand their own territories. Others wondered why they had to pay taxes to species that provided no real services in return. Meanwhile, on Lunar Command Center orbiting Earth, President Kim Dae-ho sat in his office reviewing intelligence reports with growing concern. Kim was a practical man who had spent his career in diplomatic service before becoming Earth's leader. He understood better than most what the Council's attention meant for humanity's future. Admiral Park Minute-ho entered the room carrying a classified data pad. Park had served in Earth's expanding fleet for 20 years and had personally overseen the establishment of several human colonies. He was proud of humanity's achievements, but he also understood the military realities they now faced. "The intelligence is confirmed, sir," Park said as he handed over the data pad. "The Council is planning something significant. Our agents report increased military communications between the major species. They're coordinating something they've never attempted before." Dr. Lee So-young, Earth's leading expert on galactic politics, joined them in the secure conference room. She had spent years studying how the Council operated, and her research painted a grim picture for any species that challenged their authority. "Every independent species that has faced Council pressure has either submitted completely or been destroyed," she explained, calling up historical records on the room's main display. "The pattern is always the same. First comes an ultimatum disguised as negotiations. The terms are designed to be impossible to accept while maintaining any real independence." She showed them records of the last species to resist Council authority, the maritime depths dwellers from the Kepler system. They had tried to maintain their independence for 3 years before their worlds were blockaded and their population forced to relocate to Council-controlled territories. "The Council expects every species to follow this pattern," Dr. Lee continued. "They make demands that no proud civilization can accept, then offer slightly better terms that still amount to complete surrender. Eventually, faced with economic collapse or military destruction, every species has chosen survival over freedom." The 3 leaders studied the incoming transmission from Nexus Prime. The message was formal and polite, but its meaning was crystal clear. Humanity was invited to attend negotiations regarding their concerning expansion activities and violations of established galactic protocols. The specific demands were worse than they had expected. The Council wanted humanity to abandon their 3 newest colony systems, pay reparations equivalent to 50 years of Earth's total economic output, and accept permanent Council oversight of any future expansion. In exchange, humanity would be allowed to maintain their existing settlements under Council supervision. Admiral Park shook his head in disbelief. They want us to become a vassal state. These aren't negotiations, they're terms of surrender with extra steps to make them sound reasonable. President Kim studied the demands carefully. The Council was confident that humanity would accept these terms rather than face the combined might of 12 established civilizations. They had never encountered a species willing to risk everything for independence. What the Council didn't know was that their ultimatum would force humanity to make a choice that would change the galaxy forever. The secure conference room beneath Luna's surface buzzed with activity as Earth's most important leaders gathered around the polished metal table. President Kim Dae-ho sat at the head, his face grave as he read through the Council's demands for the 3rd time. The document seemed to get worse with each reading. Admiral Park Min-ho paced behind his chair, unable to sit still as anger coursed through him. He had spent decades building humanity's space fleet, watching colonies grow from small outposts into thriving worlds. Now the Council wanted to take it all away and turn humanity into servants. Listen to this, President Kim said, his voice tight with controlled fury. They want us to abandon New Busan, New Daegu, and the entire Centauri system. 3 colonies with over 2 million people combined. They expect us to just pack up and leave. Dr. Lee So-young pulled up financial projections on her tablet, her expression growing more troubled as she worked through the numbers. As Earth's top expert on galactic economics, she understood exactly what the Council's demands would mean for humanity's future. The reparations alone would bankrupt us, she said, showing her calculations to the others. 50 trillion credits over 20 years. That's more than our entire economy produces. We would have to strip mine Earth itself to pay even half of that amount. Commander Choi Han-yul, head of Human Intelligence Services, sat quietly in the corner reviewing classified reports. Her network of agents throughout the galaxy had been working overtime to understand the Council's true intentions. What they had discovered was both terrifying and potentially game-changing. There's something else, Commander Choi said, finally speaking up. Our intelligence has uncovered information the Council doesn't know we have. They are not as united as they appear, and they are not as secure in their control as they pretend. She activated the room's main display, showing a complex web of secret communications her agents had intercepted over the past months. The data revealed cracks in the Council's seemingly solid foundation. 3 major species are secretly preparing to break away from Council control, she continued. The Kepler Federation has been building hidden military facilities for 2 years. The Nephilim Collective has been secretly negotiating independent trade agreements. Most surprisingly, even some of the Valdris outer colonies are talking about rebellion. Admiral Park stopped pacing and stared at the intelligence reports. The Valdris were one of the founding members of the Council, their civilization older than most others combined. If even they were having second thoughts about Council rule, the situation was more unstable than anyone had imagined. They're all waiting for someone to make the first move, Commander Choi explained. Every species that has tried to resist the Council has done it alone, and every one of them has been crushed. But if multiple species acted together, or if someone proved that the Council could be defied successfully, everything would change. Dr. Lee pulled up historical records of species that had faced similar ultimatums. The pattern was always the same and always ended in submission or destruction. The Council had perfected a system that made resistance seem impossible. The depth dwellers from Kepler tried to negotiate for better terms, she said, showing images of their beautiful underwater cities. The Council blockaded their worlds until their people were starving. They surrendered after 3 years and were relocated to prison colonies. She switched to records of the Flame Dancers, a species of energy beings who had tried to maintain their independence through military resistance. The Council convinced 6 neighboring species to join the fight against them. They were outnumbered 20-1 and completely eliminated within a year. President Kim studied each historical example carefully. Every species had tried traditional approaches: military resistance, diplomatic negotiation, economic pressure. Every approach had failed because the Council held too many advantages in traditional conflicts. What if we don't play by their rules? He asked quietly. The room fell silent as the others tried to understand what he meant. Admiral Park sat down for the first time since the meeting began, his expression shifting from anger to curiosity. "Explain," the Admiral said. President Kim stood and walked to the display showing the Council's ultimatum. Every species that has faced this situation has tried to fight the Council's power or negotiate with it. What if we simply refuse to recognize it at all? Dr. Lee frowned as she considered the implications. You mean ignore their authority completely? Just act as if they have no right to make these demands. Exactly, President Kim replied. They expect us to either fight or negotiate. They've planned for both responses. But what if we do neither? What if we simply tell them they have no authority over us and walk away? Commander Choi pulled up tactical assessments of Council military forces. It's incredibly risky, she warned. If we refuse their authority and they decide to use force, we would be facing overwhelming odds. But we wouldn't be alone, Admiral Park said, beginning to understand the plan. If those other species are really waiting for someone to make the first move, our refusal could trigger a cascade of independence declarations. The idea was so simple it was revolutionary. Instead of trying to negotiate better terms or prepare for military conflict, humanity would simply deny the Council's right to make demands in the first place. It had never been tried because it seemed like diplomatic suicide. President Kim made the decision that would shock Earth's diplomatic establishment and potentially change the galaxy forever. We'll attend their negotiations, he announced. But we're not going there to bargain or surrender. We're going to deliver a message that will redefine what it means to be free. Ambassador Yoon Ji-woo was chosen to lead the delegation. As she prepared for departure, she carried with her not treaties or concessions, but a simple declaration that would challenge thousands of years of galactic order. The massive Council mothership Eternal Harmony floated in the void like a small moon, its hull stretching for kilometers in every direction. The ship had been designed specifically to intimidate visitors, with towering spires and gleaming surfaces that made any approaching vessel look like a tiny insect. Ambassador Yoon Ji-woo gazed out the viewport of her shuttle as they approached the docking bay, knowing that this intimidation was entirely intentional. Remember, she said to her small team of 3 assistants, we are not here to negotiate. We are here to deliver a message and leave. Nothing they say or do should change that plan. Her deputy, Minister Kang Soo-jin, nodded nervously. She had spent years in diplomatic service and had never heard of anyone refusing a Council ultimatum. The very idea seemed like madness. Ambassador, are you certain about this approach? Once we say those words, there will be no taking them back. Ambassador Yoon checked her notes one final time. The words she was about to speak had been carefully chosen by President Kim himself, reviewed by Earth's best legal experts, and approved by the entire human leadership. They were simple, clear, and would change everything. I have never been more certain of anything, she replied. The docking process took nearly an hour, another deliberate intimidation tactic. The humans were kept waiting in increasingly elaborate corridors, each one larger and more impressive than the last. Alien servants guided them through chambers filled with treasures from 1,000 worlds, past walls displaying the flags of every species that had submitted to Council authority. Finally, they arrived at the grand negotiation chamber. The room was enormous, with a curved ceiling that stretched up into darkness. At the center sat the Council's negotiation table, a massive curved structure that placed the 12 Council representatives on an elevated platform while forcing visitors to stand below them like supplicants. Ambassador Vethran of the Etherians sat at the center position, his crystalline body reflecting the chamber's lights in dazzling patterns. To his right sat General Mordak of the Vorthans, his scaled armor polished to a mirror shine. The other Council representatives filled out the remaining positions, each one representing billions of beings and centuries of accumulated power. Welcome, representatives of humanity, Vethran began, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. We are pleased that you have chosen to attend these negotiations rather than force us to take more direct action. Ambassador Yoon and her team took their positions at the small table provided for them. The size difference was striking, 4 humans at a modest table facing 12 powerful aliens on an elevated platform. Everything about the room's design was meant to make them feel small and helpless. We have prepared generous terms for humanity's integration into the galactic community, Vethran continued, activating holographic displays that showed the Council's demands in detail. These terms represent months of careful consideration by the finest legal minds in the galaxy. He began reading through the demands methodically, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had done this many times before. Surrender of 3 colony systems. Massive reparations for disturbing galactic peace. Permanent Council oversight of all human activities. Each demand was presented as reasonable and necessary for galactic stability. General Mordak leaned forward as Vethran spoke, his yellow eyes fixed on the human delegation. He had crushed rebellions on dozens of worlds, and he expected to see the familiar signs of fear and desperation in these humans. Instead, he saw something that puzzled him: calm attention and careful note-taking. Ambassador Yoon listened to every word without interruption, occasionally writing something in her notebook. Her assistants sat quietly beside her, their faces showing no emotion. When Vethran finished his presentation, she looked up and spoke for the first time. "I request a 5-minute recess to consult with my team," she said simply. Vethran granted the request with obvious satisfaction. In his experience, this was when visiting delegations realized the hopelessness of their situation and began preparing to surrender. He had seen it hundreds of times before: the whispered conversations, the desperate attempts to find some way out, the eventual acceptance of defeat. But as he watched the human delegation, something seemed different. Instead of desperate whispers, they spoke quietly and calmly. Instead of fear, they showed determination. Ambassador Yoon even smiled slightly as she reviewed her notes one final time. When the recess ended, Ambassador Yoon stood and faced the council. The chamber fell completely silent as she prepared to speak. Every council representative expected to hear either a request for better terms or an outright surrender. Instead, they heard words that no council member had ever heard before. "We reject your authority, your demands, and your entire premise," Ambassador Yoon said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "Humanity recognizes no council claim over our colonies, our trade, or our destiny. We came here to inform you of this decision, not to negotiate it." The silence that followed was so complete that the ambient hum of the ship's systems seemed deafeningly loud. For several long moments, none of the council representatives could process what they had just heard. The concept of outright rejection was so foreign to their experience that they couldn't immediately respond. General Mordak was the first to recover, his scales flushing deep red with rage. "You cannot simply refuse," he roared, half rising from his seat. "No species has ever dared to." "Until now," Ambassador Yoon interrupted, her voice remaining perfectly calm. She gestured to her team, and they began walking toward the chamber's exit. The council representatives sat frozen in shock as the humans simply turned their backs and left. "Wait!" Vethran called out, his composed demeanor cracking for the first time in centuries. "You must return to discuss realistic options." Ambassador Yoon paused at the chamber entrance and looked back at the council one final time. "The only realistic option is learning to live with free neighbors instead of vassal states. Good day." And with those words, humanity walked away from an ultimatum that no one in galactic history had ever refused. The news traveled faster than any spaceship could fly. Within hours of the human delegation's departure from the Eternal Harmony, encrypted messages were racing across subspace networks to every corner of the galaxy. The impossible had happened: a species had simply walked away from a council ultimatum and lived to tell about it. On the industrial world of Kepler-7, mining foreman Jorik paused in his work as the news reached his crew through underground channels. For 30 years, he had watched his people extract rare minerals from their homeworld only to see most of the profits disappear as council taxes. The human story spread through the mining tunnels like fire through dry grass. "They just said no?" asked his assistant, a young Kepler barely out of training. "They didn't fight or try to make a deal." "That's what the reports say," Jorik replied, his weathered face showing the first spark of hope he had felt in decades. "They told the council they had no authority and walked away." Similar conversations were happening on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. In the underwater cities of Neptune's Trident, the aquatic Nephilim discussed the news in excited bubbles of communication. Their species had paid tribute to the council for over 400 years, watching their ocean worlds slowly stripped of resources while receiving nothing in return. Elder Tidesinger Morahai called an emergency gathering in the Great Coral Amphitheater. Her ancient voice carried through the water as she addressed thousands of her people floating in the ceremonial chamber. "For generations, we have believed that resistance meant war," she sang in the traditional way of her people. "But these humans have shown us a third path. They have proven that the Council's authority exists only if we choose to recognize it." The most shocking development came from the Valdris home system, where one of the Council's founding member species began tearing itself apart. The Valdris outer colonies, tired of sending their wealth to support the central government's council membership, began declaring independence from their own species' leadership. Commander Thelos of the Valdris Third Fleet received orders to blockade the rebellious colonies, but his crew was split between loyalty to their homeworld and sympathy for their fellow Valdris who wanted freedom. The ancient species that had helped establish the Council's authority was now fracturing under the weight of its own contradictions. Back in the Council chambers on Nexus Prime, the 12 representatives faced a crisis unlike anything in their recorded history. General Mordak paced behind his seat like a caged predator, his scaled fists clenched in frustration. "We must act immediately," he declared, his voice echoing with barely controlled rage. "Every hour we delay, more species question our authority. We need to make an example of these humans before their defiance spreads further." But Arbiter Nexum of the bureaucratic syndics raised a concern that chilled the other council members. His species had spent centuries cataloging the military capabilities of every known civilization, and his files on humanity contained a disturbing amount of blank space. "What do we actually know about human military capabilities?" he asked, pulling up classified intelligence reports. "They have never been tested in large-scale warfare. Their expansion has been peaceful, their colonies defended only against pirates and minor threats." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. For all their confidence in dealing with humanity, the Council had never actually seen humans fight a real war. Their ships were untested in major battles, their tactics were unknown, and their industrial capacity was largely theoretical. Ambassador Vethran studied the sparse intelligence files with growing unease. "Surely a species so young cannot pose a serious military threat to our combined forces." "That's what we thought about their diplomatic capabilities," Nexum replied dryly. "And yet they just accomplished something no species has managed in over 1,000 years." Meanwhile, on Earth, President Kim Dae-ho was discovering that humanity's bold gesture had opened doors they never knew existed. Commander Choi Han-yul burst into his office carrying reports that seemed almost too good to believe. "Sir, we're receiving diplomatic overtures from species we've never even heard of," she announced, spreading data tablets across his desk. "Trade agreements, technology exchanges, mutual defense pacts, all being offered outside Council approval." Admiral Park Minute-ho joined them, his expression mixing excitement with concern. "The Kepler Federation has formally requested military advisors to help plan their independence declaration. The Nephilim are offering exclusive access to their underwater manufacturing facilities. Even some of the smaller Council member species are sending secret messages asking about our independence protocols." Dr. Lee So-young reviewed the incoming diplomatic proposals with amazement. "These offers represent more economic opportunity than we've seen in our entire history of space exploration. If even half of these species follow through, humanity could become the center of a new galactic trade network." The irony was not lost on President Kim. By refusing to negotiate with the Council, humanity had gained more negotiating partners than they had ever imagined possible. Species that had been forced into Council membership for centuries were suddenly looking for alternatives. "What's our status with the 3 species Commander Choi identified as potential rebels?" President Kim asked. "The Kepler Federation will formally declare independence within the week," she replied. "The Nephilim are refusing all tribute payments as of today. The Valdra situation is more complicated. They're essentially fighting a civil war between their homeworld government and their outer colonies." As reports continued flowing in from across the galaxy, President Kim realized that humanity's simple act of refusal had accomplished something that centuries of warfare and diplomacy could not. They had proven that the Council's power was not absolute, that their authority existed only as long as others chose to recognize it. The galaxy was learning a lesson that would reshape civilization itself. Sometimes the most powerful word in any language was not yes, it was no. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Yoon Ji-woo walked out of the Council chamber, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The impossible had become reality. Over 30 species had either declared complete independence from Council control or announced they would govern themselves without Council interference. What historians would later call the Independence Cascade had swept across civilized space like a tidal wave. The first major test came when General Mordak finally convinced the remaining Council members to take military action. The Vorthan Empire's massive war fleet, which had not faced serious opposition in over 200 years, launched what they called a police action against the Kepler Federation. It was meant to be a quick demonstration of Council power that would frighten other rebellious species back into submission. Instead, it became the Council's most humiliating defeat in recorded history. The Kepler Federation had spent months converting their industrial mining ships into defensive vessels using technology shared by human engineers. When the Vorthan dreadnoughts arrived expecting to face primitive mining equipment, they encountered something entirely different. The converted ships moved with unexpected speed and coordination. Their mining lasers had been modified into surprisingly effective weapons, and their knowledge of asteroid fields gave them tactical advantages the Vorthons had never considered. Commander Thekvar of the Vorthon Third Fleet found himself in the unprecedented position of requesting reinforcements against what should have been helpless civilian vessels. His flagship, the pride of the Vorthon military, had been damaged by a converted ore hauler that used mining explosives in ways no military manual had ever anticipated. "How are civilian miners outfighting our battle fleet?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Sir, they're not fighting like civilians," came the reply. "They're using tactics we've never seen before, weapons we don't understand, and they seem to know exactly where our ships will be before we get there." The truth was even more embarrassing for the Vorthons. Human military advisors had helped the Kepler Federation develop entirely new approaches to space combat, turning their industrial knowledge into military advantages. Mining ships that could navigate dangerous asteroid fields proved surprisingly difficult for traditional warships to catch, and crews experienced in precision work with explosives created weapons that confused Vorthon sensors. News of the failed police action spread across the galaxy even faster than the original story of humanity's walkaway. Species that had been watching nervously from the sidelines suddenly realized that the Council's military might was not as overwhelming as it appeared. If converted mining ships could hold off Vorthon dreadnoughts, then perhaps independence was not suicide after all. On New Sol, the bustling capital city of humanity's first major colony on Centauri Prime, President Kim Dae-ho prepared to address representatives from over 40 independent worlds. The city's skyline mixed human architecture with designs from dozens of alien species who had established diplomatic missions there. It was a sight that would have been impossible just months earlier. The conference hall buzzed with excitement as beings from across the galaxy gathered for the founding of what they were calling the Independent Worlds Alliance. Unlike the Council's intimidating chamber designed to make visitors feel small, this meeting space had been built to accommodate different species as equals, with adjustable seating, multiple atmospheric zones, and translation systems for dozens of languages. 6 months ago, many of us lived under systems we never chose, President Kim began, his words being simultaneously translated for the diverse audience. Today, we gather not as subjects or vassals, but as free beings choosing to work together. He paused as applause filled the chamber, the sound mixing with the clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones that different species use to show approval. Humanity will not replace the Council's dominance with our own, he continued. Instead, we offer something that has never been tried on a galactic scale, voluntary cooperation between sovereign equals. No species will be forced to join our alliance, and any member can leave whenever they choose. Dr. Lee So-young, now serving as humanity's first ambassador to the Independent Worlds Alliance, had spent weeks working with representatives from dozens of species to draft their founding charter. The document was revolutionary in its simplicity. It established principles of mutual respect, voluntary cooperation, and shared defense, but gave no single species authority over the others. The old system was built on fear and submission, she explained to the assembled delegates. Our alliance is built on mutual benefit and respect. We are stronger together by choice, not by force. The contrast with Council governance could not have been more stark. Where the Council demanded tribute and obedience, the alliance offered trade and partnership. Where the Council imposed its will through military threat, the alliance protected its members through collective defense agreements that each species could choose to join or decline. Meanwhile, in the increasingly empty halls of Nexus Prime, Ambassador Vethran faced a reality that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The Council that had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years was crumbling. Half of their member species had either left outright or were in open rebellion. Their military forces were tied down fighting brush wars across a dozen systems. Their authority, once unquestioned, was now openly mocked on worlds they had never even heard of. The final humiliation came in the form of a formal diplomatic request that Vethran had to approve despite every instinct screaming against it. The remaining Council members needed to open negotiations with the Independent Worlds Alliance, not as superiors demanding submission, but as equals seeking accommodation. Ambassador Yoon Ji-woo received the Council's request while standing in the observation deck of New Sol's orbital station. Through the transparent walls, she could see a sight that perfectly captured how much the galaxy had changed. Dozens of ships from newly independent worlds flew in loose formation with human vessels, not as subjects following masters, but as free beings choosing to travel together. A Kepler mining ship flew alongside a sleek Nephilim transport. A converted Valdris colony vessel shared space with 3 different species that had declared independence just weeks earlier. Each ship flew its own flag, represented its own government, and had chosen to be there. As she prepared for negotiations that would establish a new relationship between the Council and the Alliance, Ambassador Yoon reflected on how a simple word had changed everything. By refusing to accept imposed authority, by simply saying no and walking away, humanity had shown the galaxy a truth that had been hidden for centuries. In the vast darkness of space, freedom was not something given by the powerful to the weak. It was something taken by the brave, and shared with all who had the courage to reach for it.